neutrality. First on the agenda as we delve into the reality of information and its distribution towards you. What is net neutrality? We're going to take that on with our first guest. Live from Seattle, 8:20 a.m., The Word today. Science and Technology Tuesday, taking on information, the war between information, fake news, net neutrality, and so much more. Net neutrality, however, seems to be an area of real confusion. What does it mean? What's it about? And what is its fate with the current administration? So we're going to be delving into that. You are going to be educated by the end of this program, I'll tell you, inviting Tom Kulik to join us. He is an attorney in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's a cyber attorney, which to me, Tom, is pretty interesting. Welcome to Live from Seattle.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
A cyber attorney, what all does that entail, actually?
Well, actually, it's when you're dealing with cyber issues, it's dealing with ransomware attacks and other privacy breaches that do occur, whether it's through state-sponsored terrorism. In most cases like ours, it's somebody that might be either operating in a basement or a criminal organization that's attempting to get your data.
Fascinating.
So there are issues that are involved with that, as well as general technology issues. To sum it up, I'm basically a lawyer who deals with the impact of technology on your business.
Okay, and that's not something that we've even had to worry about in law 20 years ago, so this is fairly new.
Very true.
Wow.
Very true.
So, and I'm assuming that in cyber law, a lot of things are having to be hashed out because a lot of the precedents of our legal system had no foresight to include the internet, computer software, the exchange of information, and the like.
It's very true. It's actually where this whole net neutrality debate comes in. It's kind of an interesting history because for your listeners, to help them understand, when we talk about net neutrality, what we're talking about is the principles that ISPs, or Internet Service Providers, should enable access to all content and services, regardless of the source of that, without favoring or blocking any particular content or services. So sometimes you hear this called the open internet, and that's what it is. It's meant to maintain policies that ensure that there is an open access and use of the internet and the content on the internet. And as you know, the internet's really a relatively new phenomenon. It came from the old ARPANET and something that was created by the Department of Defense as a distributed communications mechanism back in the 70s and 80s, and then got kind of repurposed in a way to the internet back in the 90s. And so it's a relatively new phenomenon. But telecommunication services, such as our phone providers, have been around for over 100 years. And so that's where some of the pull is that you have this advent of computers and computer-aided communications that have caused some problems with the law, which sadly is always trying to keep up.
Taking into account our communication, telephones, things like that, does net neutrality try to mirror some of those laws?
Well, actually, what happens with net neutrality, just to give you a quick, interesting history lesson, because it has us understand the debate that's going on now. We all know the old Ma Bell, the old Bell telephone companies, which basically monopolized telephone services for a very, very long time, and that were basically taken apart back in the early 1980s. Back in the 1960s, it was already recognized that computers were helping facilitate the transmission of data in those communications. It wasn't an interaction with the users. It was just helping switching and routing those calls rather than being physically patched by an operator. And so at that time, they also made a distinction between a basic computer-aided service and an enhanced service that required some interaction with the user. And that way to distinguish those things actually was maintained through the 1980s, all through the 1990s with the Telecommunications Act, which attempted to try to address this new and open internet. So you have this difference between what is a telecommunication service, which is a traditional telephone service, and what we call an information service, which ISPs were under for a very long time until the former Obama administration had actually in 2015 designated those services not as information services, but as telecommunications services, which are much more heavily regulated. And that's where the problem is right now. There's this pull between, should this ISPs be more heavily regulated like a telephone company, or should it be a lighter touch regulatory framework the way it had been prior to 2015? And that's the tug of war that's going on right now.
Any personal thoughts, and you can't get into the head of the last administration, but do you have any personal thoughts as to why they wanted to take the information service providers and put them under more of a telecommunication heavily regulated rather than an information service?
Great question. And I think it wasn't for any nefarious purpose, at least from my own viewpoint. What had happened is, back in 2005, there was a policy statement put out by the FCC that talked about the 4 pillars of net neutrality, and open access being one of them. It also talked about being able to get the content that you want to get to, use the devices you want to use, and have certain competition in the marketplace. It is a policy that is still in place today. What happened, though, is that in trying to enforce those pillars, the FCC was running into a stumbling block because it tried to, at first, it took an action against Comcast because Comcast blocked a company known as BitTorrent, or a service known as BitTorrent. It's a peer-to-peer file sharing service. And what that is, it's just 2 computers communicating with one another. And so you'd have some people that would be part of the BitTorrent network that want to grab files from someone else's computer. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Lots of those files, sadly, were not really legal. They were pirated movies, etc. Not that all of BitTorrent did that. It was just a percentage of it. But Comcast didn't care and wanted to basically shut it down. And the FCC took exception, saying, hey, listen, we need to keep the Internet open. That's not something you can do. And the court said, no, you don't have the authority, FCC, to do that. So the FCC tried to gin up some regulatory authority without the changes that happened, and it was again shot down. And so it forced them to change it, meaning it being information services for ISPs. They meant to change those into telecommunication services under Title I of their act. And that was a much bigger play there. And as a result of that, they were in a position that required them now to enforce it. The courts then said, hey, that's fine. This actually works. And that's where we're at with that administration. So I don't think it was anything nefarious. I think they just said we need to enforce net neutrality, and since there's no legislation really doing that, we're going to try to take action by reclassifying these ISPs as telecommunications services. That's what I think happened.
So what I'd like to take on in our last few minutes together is kind of the good, the bad, and even the future of net neutrality. What do you think are the good points and the things that we need to take into consideration in this debate?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's about a debate. And I think all that's happened recently is the FCC chairman, L.L.P, has said, listen, I want to roll back from these more draconian rules to a lighter touch framework, and let's have a debate about that. So this notice of proposed rulemaking, which he's put out there, is basically a notice and comment period for the public and interested companies and persons to give comment to what they think should be done. I think the positive is there's a really good conversation going on right now about this, about throttling, which is changing the speed of the network that you're receiving the data on, about blocking, about something known as paid prioritization, where a company can pay to have its content brought to the front of the line, or in fact, an ISP themselves using their own content at the front of the line. And there are issues with that. If there's no rules in place, what's to prevent companies from doing that? This is a good conversation to have. So I'm actually very optimistic that there'll be some semblance of some of these rules that will remain in place that rightfully should be with the FCC, and then maybe some other rules in place that the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, might be able to enforce. And they're currently the governmental agency that enforces privacy protections on the Internet against websites. So I think we're going to see some positives come out of this. And in any event, you're going to see one amazing debate going on regarding net neutrality.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's a good thing.
I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about it today, because it's an issue that affects every single one of us, unless we are completely off grid in every sense, and in which case you're probably not even listening to the radio right now, so it's okay.
Well said.
Any concerns about net neutrality that we should keep in mind?
Well, the good news is that there is this policy statement from 2005 that's still in place. My concern is that I don't think we can get away from the concept of preventing Internet service providers from throttling and blocking and paid prioritization. There needs to be a framework in place. I don't think we can just get rid of that framework, but it creates some problems if we reclassify ISPs back to information services. We'll need to make sure that some other regulatory body that has the structure and rights through those regulations to do so will actually do that. And in my opinion, it might be the Federal Trade Commission. Chairman Pai has alluded a little bit to that in some of the comments he's made, and we'll have to just wait and see. But hopefully there'll still be some structure in place, because I think it does need that.
Well, I think the concern is that big, powerful companies can bully and push out other smaller companies where the Internet should be a free exchange of information. The concern is as well in this era of everyone pointing fingers at fake news. Anything that I don't like seems to be fake news. So it would be a concern that the people who have the most power and the most money can decide what you know, what you hear, and what you're allowed to even have access to.
Well said. I mean, unlike the early days where it was more of a Wild West on the Internet and companies were vying for placement and size and content out there, the Internet is much more mature now. And as you aptly point out, there are many larger companies. Some of them are ISPs that have their own content now, are getting their own content out there and not relying on other websites for their content. So the smaller player, or the more, it doesn't matter what end of the political spectrum you're on, if you need to get to certain content, some of that may get into jeopardy if we don't have certain rules in place. So, I don't think we're looking at getting rid of these rules, although the notice says, hey, should we keep them? Should we modify them? What should we do? It is very important to have this debate. And for all your listeners, be engaged. Let's watch what's going on with this, because when it comes to an open net, that's something that benefits us all, and we need to protect that.
Oh, it's so good to talk with you. Thank you for getting us up to speed here. I'm a little more informed, and it helps us as we move forward on this really important issue. It's Science and Technology Tuesday. Tom Kulik is attorney. He is a cyber attorney. It's a fascinating area of law, and he has been our guest.
It's a lot of fun.
It is kind of fun, huh?
Educating.
Yeah.
Well, it is, and I love educating. So when you have these issues that come up, and I'll tell you, net neutrality is coming back up soon. Because I told you about this notice period, it's going to be another 3 or 4 months or so. So end of summer, early September, you're probably going to talk to me again, because we'll have more things to go on by then with all these comments being in.
Outstanding.
And I'm always happy to help. So
yeah, I appreciate it. It does kind of feel good, doesn't it? Because you are making a difference. You have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. I really appreciate people like you that share that with the general public so that we can be informed and be part of the debate. So thanks for coming on live from Seattle today.
Well, it's my pleasure. I think we all need to do this, and I'm very privileged that the Lord has given me this opportunity to have a voice and to have the knowledge. It's important for me to disseminate that to others. I think it's part of what I need to do as a lawyer, and honestly, I love doing it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll look forward to it. Outstanding. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.